You'd mentioned this idea of Jesus' divine authority. And as I know that one of the positions put out there is that by non-Christians is that Jesus maybe had divine prerogative. He thought, he was sent by God to proclaim his message, but that he's not actually a divine being, right? I mean, that's one of the models out there. What are some points you would suggest for people in terms of how they should reply to that? And maybe that's going to lead us to just dig into the book.
Yeah, it will. I guess we can start with the first scene that I tackle in the book, which is the earliest miracle story in the earliest gospel to be written. Historians love to find the earliest story and the earliest account because for some people, they will say that's less of a chance for legend to creep in and change some of the core details of the story. So I start with Mark chapter 2, the healing of the paralytic. And in this, Jesus is claiming to have divine authority to forgive sin. And for those who might be familiar with it, you know that Jesus teaching in a house, then he is interrupted, and then four friends lower one of their other friends who is paralyzed through the roof. They dig a little hole, they lower him down, and then the scribes are sitting there. They're watching, what's Jesus going to say? And the people are looking on. And Jesus says to him, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Mark chapter 2, verse 5. So I talk about how we can look at that historically. But the scribes were really the theologians in the audience, and they understood what Jesus was saying here. They thought he was a blasphemer because he was taking God's prerogatives for himself. He was speaking like God does. He was acting like God does. Because Psalm 103 tells us that Jesus is acting like God does because in Psalm 103, God is the one who heals and forgives. Here, Jesus forgives first. It's actually important. Take a step back, think about the beauty of this scene and how the compassion of Jesus is so beautiful in this scene. But he actually prioritizes the man's spiritual state. He forgives him first, even though he's clearly there for healing. But then he says, so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. He tells the paralytic, get up and walk, take up your mat and go home, right? So when he gets up and walks, Jesus is giving people something that they could see so that they could believe in something they couldn't see, that he really does have authority on earth to forgive sins, that he isn't a blasphemer, because people would be thinking, why would God allow Jesus to heal this man if he was a blasphemer? But Jesus is not doing anything like any prophet or priest or anybody else ever did. This is pretty novel, actually. And so the scribes understood he was taking a divine prerogative for himself, and that's why this fit a kind of cultural definition of blasphemy for them. They knew this was not just a human claim, this was a divine claim.
Now, someone like Bart Ehrman would say, well, yeah, but priests forgave sins on behalf of God and other people forgave sins. So what you would say is that it's the forgiving of sins, but also coupled with the addition of the miracle worker, right? The miracle that occurred for the paralytic man to stand up, take his mat, and walk, right? So that's sort of like the miracle is the evidence of the divine prerogative. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, what's interesting here is Jesus uses the phrase Son of Man, which we can talk about more later. People think he's a blasphemer, but then he points to vindication. And in this case, that vindication is the healing proper. When the man is actually healed, it shows Jesus does have authority on earth to forgive sins. And the thing about Ehrman's argument that's so interesting to me is I looked for this for quite a while. I could find nothing. There is no extant text anywhere where a Jewish priest says your sins are forgiven to anybody. Now, you could think, well, Jewish priests could be involved in atonement rituals. You could be involved in sacrifices. You could even pray for people. And yet, in this case, for example, the Day of Atonement, if somebody comes with a sacrifice, they're penitent, the priest could say that if God sees that you have a sacrifice, that you're penitent and God forgives you. But there's actually no text anywhere where a Jewish priest says, son, your sins are forgiven. Contrast that with Jesus. He is not in the temple. There is no sacrifice. It is not the Day of Atonement. And Jesus doesn't even pray or make reference to God, which is what the scribes were noting, that he just did it seemingly out of his own authority. And so there's really no comparison to priests because we don't have any texts where priests are pronouncing the forgiveness of sins. There is a way that human beings can be involved in this whole forgiveness process, but this was not it. You had to be a priest in the temple with the sacrifice, all that, right? So they can pray for you and do atonement rituals, but Jewish people knew that ultimately God was the one who forgave sin, not priests.
You mentioned Mark 2. Jesus mentions the Son of Man. First, the question I'd ask for you is, how would you describe who the Son of Man is?
Yeah, so when Jesus talks about himself as the Son of Man, first of all, this is one of the bedrock facts of the historical Jesus, that he called himself the Son of Man. I start with that, and also Jesus' reputation as a miracle worker. That's kind of my foundational bedrock. So, the Son of Man, who doubts that? Jesus, 81 times throughout the Gospels, 69 times just in the synoptics, always on the lips of Jesus throughout the Gospels. One time it's not him, but the crowds are quoting him, calling himself the Son of Man. Oftentimes people will say, well, that could just be a self-reference, an Aramaic idiom to just say me or you or some person.
Mm-hmm.
But the difference is, this is the criteria of dissimilarity. Jesus always makes it definite. It's not just exactly like Judaism. He always calls himself the Son of Man, almost like a title. And so he's actually pointing to transcendence. And later on, we can talk more about Daniel 7 and other texts that talk about the Son of Man as actually pointing to transcendence. But even if it might be a little bit less clear here, it will become much more explicit later at his Jewish examination. So at the bare minimum, he's talking about himself, that I can forgive sins.